It was supposed to be just another ordinary day in the Vatican. No celebration scheduled, no official statements. But without any prior notice, an image began to circulate discreetly through the quiet hallways of the Curia, and within minutes, it had overtaken Catholic social media around the world. Pope Leo XIV, kneeling alone before the tomb of Pope Francis. The camera, positioned from afar, captured the scene without a single word, and perhaps that's precisely why it spoke so much. The dim light of the crypt touched the marble floor with a mournful softness. The Pope's face was bowed, almost hidden by his clasped hands. There were no reporters, no altar, no sound. Only a man dressed in white, praying before the body of a predecessor who had faced dark times and left open wounds in the soul of the Church. As the image spread, the world tried to understand what did it mean. Why now? Why that tomb? The answer would not come in words but in silence. A dense, weighty, spiritual silence. A silence that screamed for those with eyes to see and hearts to discern. It was a gesture too deep for press releases. It was a sin. And so the video began. The image of a pope in silence. Before another pope, an image that sought no applause, but stirred unrest. An image that, for many, marked the beginning of something greater. The spiritual turning point the Church had long awaited and feared. After leaving the crypt, Leo XIV walked alone to the Basilica of St. Mary Major. No entourage, no Swiss guard, just the successor of Peter Rand, the weight of his heart. There, before the ancient icon of the Virgin Salus Populi Romani, the protectress of the Roman people, the Pope knelt again. It was the second half of a gesture delicately stitched between past and eternity. The image of the Virgin Mary, aged by time and history, silent witness to wars, plagues, reformations, and decays, now to gaze directly into the heart of Leo XIV, and he in return surrendered to that gaze. The prayer was long. There was no speech, no hymn, only whispers, barely audible, and tears that many claimed to have seen roll down his face. The Pope asked not for political protection. He did not plead for strategic wisdom. He begged for one thing alone: mercy. Mercy for the people, mercy for the Church, mercy for shepherds and for the faithful, mercy for those who abandoned the faith and for those still clinging to it amid the chaos. Before that icon, Pope Leo XIV seemed to carry the pain of centuries, the pain of mothers who weep for their children, the pain of those who haven't received communion in years, the pain of those wounded by the Church itself, and the pain of those who continue without understanding, without feeling, without seeing it was there. In that moment, that Rome began to breathe something it had long forgotten: holy fear, the trembling awareness of standing before something that escapes the eyes but leaves a mark on the soul. That prayer before the Virgin was more than a plea. It was a prophetic surrender, and everyone present knew something had changed. There were no official records of the gesture. No Vatican ceremony had scheduled such a sequence. No tradition obligated the Pope to do what he did. And yet, Leo XIV did it. Because there are moments in the history of faith that cannot be explained by documents, only by tears and silence. The cardinals who watched from a distance did not know how to react. The Vatican, so accustomed to protocols and pronouncements, was overcome by a sacred reverence. No one wished to comment. No one dared to interrupt. But the people knew. Images captured by the faithful and quietly shared online touched hearts across the globe. In just a few hours, Catholics from many nations began to post the moment with phrases like, "The Pope is weeping for us. Something is about to happen. Let us return to silence, where God speaks." Leo XIV had created without words a liturgy the modern world had forgotten. The liturgy of presence, of an exposed heart, of the invisible altar. Theologians began to unpack the symbolism of that day. Some saw a gesture of reconciliation between two eras of the Church. Others, a cry to heaven in times of darkness. But there was something deeper, a sense that this Pope was not merely speaking as a leader of an institution. He was speaking as a man who carried within himself the weight of a spiritual cry, and who perhaps had received a response since the time of Pope Francis. Much had been said about renewal, synodality, inclusion, but few had dared to touch the deeper wound: the loss of the sacred, the tendency to treat faith as politics, to reduce liturgy to performance, to turn mystery into marketing. And Leo XIV, by praying in silence before Francis and the Virgin, seemed to make a silent accusation, not against individuals, but against indifference, haste, superficiality. He didn't preach, he pointed with his body, with his silence, with his tears. The Church had forgotten that some places must never be negotiated, that some wounds cannot be managed, that some sins must be wept over, not explained away. And in the face of this, the Pope did not organize a sin. He didn't issue a document, he didn't form a commission. He simply knelt as the saints once did, as the martyrs did, as Mary did. The image of him kneeling before the Virgin who protects Rome is more than a photograph. It is a prophetic icon, a mirror for every bishop, a call to every father and mother, a summons to every young person still wondering whether God is listening. Yes, he is. And on that day he answered with the silence of a weeping Pope. The days that followed Leo XIV's act were marked by a perceptible shift in the spiritual climate of the Church. Something had been released, something had been touched. As if, for a brief moment, the veil between heaven and earth had been slightly lifted. The faithful began reporting sudden conversions, confessions that hadn't happened in decades, chapels overflowing in places where abandonment had become the norm. And it all began with a gesture, a kneeling, a silence, a single tear pressed to explain the event. The Vatican issued only a brief note. His Holiness sought comfort and wisdom through the intercession of those who came before, and through the tenderness of the Mother of God, nothing more. But the world already understood. This was more than a liturgical act. It was a sign, a spiritual code, a message for those with ears to hear. Pope Leo XIV wasn't seeking glory. He wasn't looking for headlines. He wanted to tear open a hole in the heavens, and he succeeded, because true prayer doesn't need explanation, it needs to be lived. And when a pope kneels in silence, God speaks through that silence. That's how it was on that day, and that's how it will be for all who understand. There is still time to kneel. There is still time to return. There is still time to hear the voice of the Virgin who protects Rome. The nations watched Leo XIV's gesture in awe. Political leaders fell silent. Intellectuals were divided between skepticism and admiration. But in the hearts of ordinary people, something had been touched. For many, that moment wasn't just a prayer, it was a new beginning. In a time when religion is so often reduced to an ideological instrument, the Pope presented himself as a servant not of institutions, but of truth. The world paused, and for the first time in a long while, heard a whisper from the altar. Leo XIV gave no speeches. He raised no flags. He issued no condemnations. Instead, he chose silence. And in that silence, he revealed the weight of a tired, divided church often lost without a compass. He wept for the lost, for the distant, for those scandalized, for those who still hold on with trembling faith. His tears were not only emotional, they were sacramental seals of a pain that was not just human but deeply spiritual. On that day, the Pope of Tears became the Pope of Awakening. Everything in Leo XIV's gesture pointed to something greater, the restoration of the inner altar. To him, faith was not a performance, it was wound and healing, memory and presence. He knew that without true adoration, without deep reconciliation, without sincere conversion, the Church loses its essence. So when he knelt, he wasn't just praying, he was interceding for a new era, an era where Christ would return to the center, where the Eucharist would no longer be a political symbol, but a profound encounter with the mystery. For decades, faithful Catholics had waited for a sign. Many wondered if the Church still remembered the sacred, if there was still room for beauty, for repentance, for the fire that purifies. Leo XIV's gesture was, for many, that sign. A breath of hope for weary priests, a comfort for struggling families, an answer for those who prayed silently. Lord, send us a shepherd after your own heart. And he answered now. It is up to each of us to decide what to do with this gesture. Ignore it, analyze it, comment on it, or allow it to transform us. Because the Pope knelt, but it is we who must now rise. The history of the Church has never been changed by ideas alone, but by men and women who heard the call and responded with their lives. What Leo XIV began with one knee on the ground may require an entire generation willing to stay on their knees until heaven opens again. In an age dominated by noise, where every word is measured by algorithms, likes, and reactions, the Pope chose the opposite, the silence that pierces. While many leaders fight for space with fiery rhetoric or sterile technicalities, Leo XIV walked into the absence of words, and it was there that God spoke loudest. That silence challenged commentators, unsettled the indifferent, and disturbed the arrogant, because deep down they knew this was real. It couldn't be manufactured, it couldn't be staged. It was a silence that didn't ask for attention, it commanded it. Every minute he spent kneeling became spiritually a sword, not against men, but against the inner structures that pull us away from the sacred. The silence of Leo XIV became a mirror, and many, seeing themselves reflected in it, didn't know what to do. What moved people most about the Pope's gesture wasn't institutional courage. It wasn't a church policy, it was the pain, authentic pain. The pain of a father carrying the sins of his children. The pain of a servant interceding for servants. The pain of one who knows that the Church is bleeding inside and out. When he knelt, no one saw a ruler. They saw a wounded man because of that. A profoundly true one. The Church had grown accustomed to covering its wounds with speeches. Leo XIV offered them as sacrifice, and that pain united. It united wounded believers, exhausted priests, forgotten lay people, because pain that is acknowledged becomes a gift. And when a pope suffers with his people, he doesn't govern, he consoles. Tomb of Pope Francis was, until that day, just a site of respectful memory. But Leo XIV's gesture transformed it into something more. A prophetic altar, not because he canonized or condemned, but because he prayed. And every sincere prayer offered before the dead becomes a bridge between ages. By kneeling there, Leo XIV united two moments in the Church, a wounded yesterday and an unseen tomorrow. He turned the past into a cry, and the future into a plea. for mercy since then. Pilgrims began visiting that tomb with new reverence, not for what it once was, but for what it now represents. The place where a pope wept for the whole church. The press expected answers. Critics expected positions. Enemies expected errors. And all received a spiritual gesture. No declarations, no confrontations, just a knee bent. Just a knee bent. And there is no argument against a gesture like that, because the heart speaks when the mind is confused. The Pope's silence disarmed the logic of war, and even those who hated him had no response. Some began calling him weak, others a saint, but no one remained indifferent. Because when a leader loves more than he speaks, even the mockers recognized this is something from above. The church had locked certain doors from within, doors that led to mystery, to adoration, to true humility. For years, those doors had been covered by debates, reforms, and decrees. But that morning, with a simple gesture, Leo XIV unlocked one of them, and those who saw it knew. Now it is up to each believer to step through, because a gesture can open, but only faith can cross. Since that day, many churches have reopened their doors during hours of silence. Many confessors have returned to sit for long hours by the tabernacle. Many candles have been lit again, without shows, without events, without applause, only faith. The door was reopened, and with it, the path back to the living presence of God. At the heart of the Vatican, where the steady echo of diplomatic footsteps, camera flashes, and quiet meetings formed the daily rhythm of the Curia, something different happened that day. It was as if time had been suspended. Staff spoke in hushed tones. The usually hurried corridors were empty. The windows were half open, but no sound escaped. The heart of the church seemed to enter into retreat. The gesture of Leo XIV had imposed an almost monastic atmosphere over the most powerful space in Catholicism. For the first time in decades, it was not the weight of ecclesial politics that filled the air, it was the weight of prayer. The Vatican itself had been forced to slow down. The press rooms, usually eager for statements, found themselves before a disconcerting silence. The diplomats didn't know how to interpret it. The cameras, accustomed to capturing spectacles, were lost in the absence of a script, because there, on that day, the Vatican, more than an administrative seat, revealed itself for what it was always meant to be, a monastery of stone built upon the blood of martyrs, a spiritual sanctuary, a place where the knee bends before the voice rises. And this memory, awakened by the Pope's gesture, was like an ancient fragrance, long forgotten. In the soul of the church, there are things no camera can capture. And that day, as the world saw the Pope in silence, kneeling, other faces were weeping too. Young priests who had lost faith in their own vocation, religious sisters who quietly questioned whether their offering still mattered, lay people, weary from scandals and disillusioned with speeches, yet still clinging to the cross by a thread. All of them, upon seeing the image of the Pope, felt an old tear fall once again. It was as if a crack had opened in the wall of fear. For the first time, the silent pain of millions had a face. The face of a Pope who didn't explain, didn't solve, but felt, and in that feeling he offered consolation. Many letters were sent to the Vatican after that day. They didn't ask for answers. They didn't demand reforms. They said simply, "Holy Father, we are weeping too." It was the beginning of a new communion, a communion among the invisible, among those who suffer in silence and finally saw someone suffer for them. Leo XIV knew that leading the church in the 21st century would not be a matter of structure, but of spirit. He didn't wish to begin his pontificate with an encyclical, but with a bent knee. And that, many theologians agreed, marked a deep reconfiguration of the very logic of authority. The Pope no longer spoke from atop a throne, but from the floor of a crypt. Power did not flow from the office, but from obedience, not from strategy, but from surrender. And in that act, he redefined what it means to shepherd in times of spiritual collapse. Many bishops, inspired by his gesture, began re-examining their priorities. Some celebrated Mass with renewed reverence. Others sought reconciliations they had long postponed. Lay people formed intercession groups. The gesture did not create programs, it created conversions. Because when the leader bows, he does not lose authority, he consecrates it. All eyes were on the Pope, but there was another presence there, invisible but real, the Mother of God herself. She, whose ancient image as Salus Populi Romani had protected Rome for centuries, was once again honored by the purest gift a Pope could offer, the silent prayer of a whole heart. And the symbol was complete, the tomb, where everything seems to end, and the Virgin, where everything begins again. Francis, the Pope of the present moment, and Mary, the Mother of Eternity. By uniting these two poles, Leo XIV traced a spiritual map, a path of return, a way where death is not the end, and where maternal intercession becomes the bridge between collapse and restoration. In that gesture, the tomb was illuminated, not by candles but by hope, because there we understood. The church will not be renewed by revolutions but by resurrections. Even weeks later, the world could not stop talking about that day. Some called it a symbolic gesture, others an emotional maneuver. But those who saw with the heart understood it wasn't just an act, It was a calling to silent adoration, to authentic repentance, to renewed closeness with the Mother, to the memory of those who came before, to the recovery of the sacred dot, and that calling still echoes. In reopened confessionals, in rosaries picked up again, in parishes that once more kneel, in homes where prayer has returned, in hearts that have started burning again. All because of one gesture, not a theatrical gesture, but a holy one. And because it was holy, it continues. Because it was pure, it multiplies. Because it was true, it takes root. The Church has listened, but now, one question remains. Will the world respond? You saw it, you felt it. You heard the silence of Pope Leo XIV echoing within you. And now, the question that remains is not about him, but about you. What if today is your day to kneel? What if now is your moment to return? What if that prayer before the tomb of Francis and the Virgin who protects Rome is also an invitation for your soul? Don't wait for greater signs. They've already come. Don't delay your response. Heaven is waiting. If this message spoke to your heart, share it, spread the gesture. Let others hear the silence that transforms. And before you leave, close your eyes, be still, and simply say, Lord, I am here. Speak to my heart, because sometimes all God needs is a heart willing to listen. Like the one that knelt that day. May the Virgin Salus Populi Romani guard you, and may Pope Leo XIV inspire your faith.